Comcheck Kerbal, how are you receiving me?
Receiving loud and clear.
Welcome. This is our very first podcast, No Space Like Home.
Yeah, I'm excited. I hope you're excited.
I'm excited, a little nervous, but technical stuff always happens. But we'll go through it. We'll see if we have good comms between us, between where I'm at and where you're at.
Yeah,
Because
everything goes well.
good comms are important, but we'll get to that later.
Absolutely.
So big news that just started. We've got Artemis II launched a couple days ago.
Yeah, launched on April 1st, which turned out to not be a joke. NASA thinks they're funny.
They think they're
Uh,
funny, but it was a beautiful launch from what I saw on the stream. I wish I could have been there, but I couldn't. But it was a beautiful launch. Like I saw videos of people literally stopping on the side of the road to get out and watch this launch. It's bringing everyone together in a place we really need in the world right now.
yeah, absolutely. I was at work watching the stream. I threw it up on my iPad. And a bunch of my coworkers started making jokes about, oh, we never went to the moon in the first place and this and that, the other thing. And you know, it, everybody kind of started talking about it. Like they'd come, back out. I work in a restaurant for those of you that don't know. So they'd come into the kitchen, and the once they got in the kitchen, all the talk was about space stuff, what was going on with NASA and things like that. And then, about a minute before the launch, every single employee was huddled around the iPad watching the countdown, and then watching the launch. And I was just like, oh, it's so funny that y'all were talking all this smack about all this stuff, and then but when it comes time for the launch to actually take place, everybody was super interested in watching it.
Yeah, I had some
And it was
coworkers that didn't even
cool.
know it was really going on. At my old job that I used to work at down in Florida, um, we all had space. We were bleeding space pretty much because we lived like right near at the Cape, pretty much, or lived or worked right near the Cape. So everyone knew
Hmm.
space. We have a giant poster. Had a giant. Okay, they still have a giant poster up on the wall of Artemis 2. That's literally probably like 7 foot by 6 foot poster of the Artemis lifting off. We always joked that it was never accurate because it was like a rendering of it, but it was never accurate because it was a daylight launch, and the very first Artemis mission launched at nighttime. But now it's an accurate
Yeah.
poster. Just ignore
Yeah.
the fact that this is Artemis 1 on it.
Yeah. But I mean, it was an amazing launch. I really enjoyed watching, kind of history be made in person. Makes me wonder if that's what it felt like when people were watching the Apollo missions.
Oh, I
Um,
bet. Like, just knowing that there's humans going off of our planet, and not just off our planet, but like to another body up in space.
yeah, I mean, because humans left our planet basically throughout our whole lives. They've been doing stuff leaving the planet. In fact, there's people alive today, people that I work with, adults that have not been alive during a time period where there hasn't been a human in space. Because since the
Late
ISS,
90s. Yeah.
late 90s, early 2000s or something, because
Yeah.
there was a point in time where and I'm not entirely sure if I'm correct on this, but I don't know if when the ISS was first launched, if once the first piece of the ISS was up there, if it was manned 100% of the time. But there did come a point in time in the ISS mission where it was manned 100% of the time, always. And from that point on till today, there have not been humans in space. So there's people that are alive that for their entire lives there's been, bare minimum of one human being in space.
So I've got an exact date for you. November 2nd, 2000 was when Expedition 1, the very first crew, launched to the space station to actually stay aboard the station. And since then, that began the uninterrupted human presence in space.
Yeah. So I
So,
mean, we're at a point that, and they are decommissioning the ISS sometime in the 2030s. Um,
Yeah,
I
they
from what I've
announced like a new plan recently where they want to try to add on like more commercial modules to the station to like build onto it, and then eventually when they decommission the main ISS, those modules can break off and form their own station.
yeah. So I'm looking at NASA's um, Arrow right now,
Hmm.
the Artemis real time operations website. And Artemis is actually on the other side of the planet from me. Uh, Using the augmented reality feature on here, I can see exactly where integrity is at this point in time, and they are on the other side of the planet. The planet is in the way.
Yeah, they actually just saw a eclipse, and that's actually our image for the stream. It is an eclipse they took because in that picture the Earth is fully lit up, but that's all lit up by lunar light. The sun is behind the Earth in that picture.
Yeah, and it looks like daytime on that side of the Earth when in reality that's the nighttime side of the Earth.
Yeah, it's just
Which is
probably
really, really
adjust
cool.
the exposure and everything, so it kind of probably brightens it all up. But yeah,
Exactly.
even when we think it's night, you have if you have a full moon outside, which we have a full moon right now, it can still get pretty bright during a full moon.
Well, we're actually 2 days out from a full moon. It was actually a full moon on Wednesday when they launched.
Okay, okay, but yeah, like
Completely full moon.
you get so much light from a full moon that it can light up a whole area pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of exposure and stuff like that, if you look at the live feed of Orion's onboard cameras that you can see, I keep calling it Orion. It's named Integrity by the crew. So this mission craft, they named their spaceship Integrity.
Yep, the Orion capsule integrity.
Yeah. Um, but if you look at their onboard cameras, they're oftentimes looking back at the Earth. With the sun in there, you don't see any stars in the background of space. And I had people at work that were looking at the stream of those onboard cameras, and they were like, "Where are the stars? I thought they were in space." The sun wasn't in frame of that photo, but the Earth was. And what was happening was with the camera's focus and everything, the Earth was so bright that it was just making it not pick up those stars. So if anybody's, looking at the onboard cameras and things and being like, "Yo, where are the stars?" They're just not bright enough to be picked up. I'm sure we'll get some really great photos from the crew of Integrity that will show stars. They can do like much longer exposures and things like that that'll be able to bring those stars into focus. But I'm super excited about more of the photos that we're going to be receiving from the crew. They're supposed to be taking a ton of photos. They have a bunch of different cameras on there that they'll be setting up as they get closer to the moon, um, which is, I think, something that we're going to be talking about a little later on. Um, but we had a successful launch. Let's talk about some of the issues that were encountered immediately after launch. Once they actually got up into space, they were doing some system checks and they actually ran into a few issues.
Yeah,
If you
number
want
one being they couldn't talk to Houston. They lost comms. Well, not completely. Houston, they could hear Houston. Houston could not hear them.
yeah,
And it took like I think 5 or 6 minutes where Houston was kept trying to do some comm checks, talking about other things, and eventually they responded. And Houston's like, "Did you hear anything we said?" They're like, "Oh yeah, we copied everything you said. You just couldn't hear us." And I think they've I haven't heard exactly what resolved it. I heard in a press conference that it was something on the ground side, and they resolved it, so it was not going to be an issue anymore. It was nothing wrong with the spacecraft.
yeah, that's what I heard too. I think it was one of the tracking stations that they had been using had an issue with its um, antenna, and so they switched to a different one, and issues were resolved. Luckily, there's tons of redundancies built into these systems nowadays, um, so
Yeah, because
there's less redundancies on the actual spacecraft, um, but there's still redundancies on the spacecraft for some of the more critical systems.
absolutely. Yeah, it was right when they were going between tracking stations. So even when they came back, they weren't sure. Okay, is this because tracking we just switched tracking stations, or is this because we switched systems to our backup? And there was a couple different things, but they have so many different ways. And actually, as they get further away from the Earth, it's gonna be easier for them to communicate because when you're orbiting around the Earth, you're constantly switching between tracking stations and everything. But as they're at the Moon, all you really gotta do is aim your satellite, aim your dishes on Earth at the Moon, and you're gonna pick them up because they're all gonna be pointing towards where they are.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the way that wavelengths work. But I do believe that they are using a different radio frequency than the Apollo missions were using. Um, but I'm not sure exactly, and I'm not sure what even to look up to find that out. But I'm pretty sure they're using some type of narrow band um, transmission.
Yeah, they had a couple different systems. I can't remember. There was one they were just talking about in the recent broadcast, and I don't remember what it is, but it was something they're like, look, even if we lose our radio, we have this. It might have been like some sort of light based system or something,
Hmm.
like a laser based thing, but they have backups on backups because they don't want to lose uh, the crew. And but yeah, so that was a big thing that got sorted out a little bit later when as the crew was getting a little further out and doing more tests. They decided they were going to power up the toilet because, surprise, this capsule is one of the first capsules that has a toilet built into it. The old ones didn't.
Yeah,
Um,
in the Apollo missions, they had to go to the bathroom in bags.
like the
Um,
famous question of how do you go to the bathroom in space? Bags.
yes, bags. It was bags up until the ISS actually, and it wasn't even there weren't even toilets on the ISS when it was first launched. When the first pieces that were up in space, they were still going to the bathroom in bags.
I don't
Um,
believe that is true. I believe the shuttle had a toilet.
the shuttle did, yes, but did they use the shuttle as their main bathroom? That would be interesting. I could be wrong.
I no, I'm almost certain that the ISS when it first started had a toilet in the I want to say Zvezda was the very first one that launched up because that was the Russian one, but that was their main habitat one. And I say that because that's part of their whole recycling system. They recycle all the waste and everything because they don't have a ton of water up there, so they have to reuse and clean and filter and yeah, make it usable.
I'm gonna be wrong a lot on this podcast, guys. It's okay.
It's okay. You're always welcome to be wrong. I'm probably going to be wrong too. Don't take anything we say as fact. We will try to be correct as many times as we can, but there will. Okay, yep. There are three toilets on the ISS on the Zvezda, the Nauka, and Tranquility modules.
Okay. Okay. The Apollo missions definitely didn't have toilets, though.
Apollo definitely did not have toilets.
Those were bags, and I believe that Orion, all the Orion capsules are equipped with those bags as well, in case the toilet fails.
Yes,
Um,
and I believe while they were troubleshooting the toilet, they may or may not have had to use those bags, but they got the toilet out pretty quick. I think the issue was one of the pumps wasn't priming properly because they're supposed to like put water in it to help prime it, and it either didn't get enough water put in or something. But that's what
yeah,
caused the issue. And once they put it in, um, the uh, I am forgetting the astronauts' names right now, but
you've got Reed, Victor,
uh,
Christina.
Christina, she was the one that was the she called herself the space plumber because she's the one that got the toilet working.
Yes, I believe she's the mission specialist from NASA, and then I forget the name of the gentleman
Jeremy
from the
Hansen.
CSA. Jeremy, he's the mission specialist from Canada Space Agency. And but I believe Christina is the like onboard like engineer, quote unquote. Um, so she was the one doing a lot of the communications through um a lot of those systems checks.
Mm-hmm. And then the last problem I had in my notes, there may have been more, but these are the major ones. So, if anyone caught during launch, they had tablets that they were using. They had Windows tablets. which I guess it really doesn't matter. You can have this on anything, but um, they had Outlook on. They use Outlook, and anyone who's ever worked in corporate and uses Outlook on Windows knows Outlook on Windows never works.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they had problems where it wasn't working. So they had to they called up IT and said, "Hey, I've got connection issues," um, which must have been a fun IT ticket for whoever got it. Connection issues between here and space for Outlook. Um, but called up and they had to reload the files on his computer, and this is on the Commander Reed's computer, I believe.
Hmm.
And even after they reloaded it, Outlook said it was offline, but it was receiving things.
Yeah. It might have something to do with them being in space. Outlook might have been confused.
Might have been confused.
Excuse me, your IP address is showing that you're currently, does that say 450 miles off of the surface?
I don't know if the IP will get that, but I guarantee you, Outlook, if you're trying to figure out your time zone, probably get a little confused while you're jumping time zones every 10 seconds.
Yeah. Because man, were they going fast.
They were going fast. They actually slowed down quite a bit in that first orbit when they got to apogee. They were only going a couple thousand miles per hour, which
I
sounds
believe it
really
was
fast,
2,600.
but what?
I believe it was 2,600 miles per hour when they were at apogee.
Yeah, and that sounds really fast to anyone on Earth, but if you're up in space, that is very slow. To get to the
Yeah.
moon, you have to be going 22,500 minimum to for escape velocity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely crazy.
I'll use. I did this in my other live stream, but I've got this little stress ball here. So let's pretend that's the Earth. So you're going around in orbit. What they actually did was they launched into an elliptical orbit where they had one orbit. They went really far away from the Earth and then they came back around. When you're coming back closer to the Earth here, gravity is pulling you in. You're going faster, faster, and faster. So at this point here, at the closest point of your orbit, you're going the fastest you're going to be for that orbit. But as you get further away, you're fighting against gravity and you're slowing down because it wants to pull you back that way. So eventually you reach out the highest point at your apogee, and that's going to be your slowest point, and then it's going to pull you back in. So they slowed down really slow there, but then when they got back here, they sped up enough where they fired their engines again, and they continued on all the way out to escape velocity. And also, that was their deorbit burn at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Because technically, that was the last orbit they were going to do. When they go to the moon, they are not orbiting.
Yep. And so, that maneuver that they executed there at that lowest point in their orbit, which is referred to as the perigee.
Mm-hmm.
Am I saying that right? Periapsis, whatever.
We
It's
play
the lowest
Kerbal,
point of their
so
orbit. Um, and they fired those engines. That's called the translunar injection burn, or TLI. That burn lasted for 5 minutes and 50 seconds. It happened yesterday at 6:49 p.m. Central Time, 7:49 p.m. Standard Time, and actually today at those same exact times, 6:49 Central, 7:49 Eastern, they did what was called the OTS burn, which was just orbital trajectory something or other. I don't remember. I could pull it up, but it's not that important. But they fine tuned their orbit. They fired the engine for about 8 seconds, and this changed their velocity by only about zero point 0.7 feet per second. It was just to make sure that they're going to be exactly where in space around the moon that they intend to be. Um, so that burn hopefully went well.
haven't
I
heard
haven't seen
anything that.
anything.
Yeah,
I haven't seen anything on it yet. Yesterday it took them a couple of hours to get everything updated and get news out about. Unless you were watching it live, um, it took a couple hours for them to get everything out there so that you could check on how the TLI burn went. But it went well, And as Travis was saying, it was also their deorbit burn.
Yep, because how this mission's going to go is they're going to fire off from the Earth, go around the moon. They're not going to be orbiting the moon in this mission. Artemis 1 tested out orbiting the moon on an unmanned way, but here they're just going around the moon, and I believe that's because the the way they did this mission to fire the way they fired off and separated from the ICPS module, they use most of their fuel in that for doing the orbit they were getting into. So they use their main engine on the service module to fire off for the rest of their velocity in the lunar orbit or lunar trajectory. They do not have enough fuel or delta V, I believe, to get into lunar orbit and leave. So that is why they are just uh, going around the moon.
Yeah, they don't have enough fuel to get into a lunar orbit at all.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's not even enough fuel. It wasn't loaded with enough fuel to do so. The reasoning behind that is similar to if we go back to the Apollo missions. I believe it was Apollo 9. It
Apollo
might have been
9
Apollo.
was Earth orbit, so.
Then it was Apollo 10.
Mm-hmm.
Apollo 10, they tested the lunar lander. They took they you know uh,
Yeah, they took.
decoupled from the command module, and there was a pilot and I'm not sure if it was a mission specialist or commander that went into the lander. And they went down to about 9 miles above the surface of the moon, and then they had to return to the command module. Now, when they were fueling the lunar lander for this test, NASA intentionally underfueled it just in case the astronauts decided we're already at the moon, we're gonna land. They underfueled it to the amount that if they had landed that lander, they wouldn't have enough fuel to take back off and make it back to the command module.
And the reason why they did that is because these guys were these hotshot test pilots from the 60s, and they knew that if they had a chance to land that thing, they were going to do it. So NASA's like, no, we can't give them the chance because they won't listen to us. They will take it.
Yeah, so I believe a little bit of the same thing is going on here. They didn't even give them enough fuel to be able to safely make it into my. Can you hear me still?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Because my uh, on-screen notification that my audio is being picked up turned off.
Oh.
But I believe a similar thing is going on here. They didn't want to give them enough fuel to get into orbit around the moon, out of fear that they might decide to do that. Might be like, you know what, we're gonna orbit the moon a couple times because we want to. Um, so if they were to fire their engines at all or do anything like that, it would change their trajectory to the point where they might no longer be able to come back home. And as much as these people are up there to um, make history and do a bunch of cool stuff, uh, they definitely want to come home. So they can't deviate from the planned trajectory and the planned burns that they have by too much, or they won't be coming home. So
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if this crew would do that, but NASA might just be playing it safe there. Because it was definitely a plan for a long time. It's interesting comparison because Apollo 7, the very first manned Apollo mission, they did like a couple orbits of the Earth. I can't remember if it was like a couple days or not, but Apollo 7, they brought the capsule up and they orbited around the Earth and they just tested everything out in the capsule after multiple unmanned tests with the earlier Apollo missions. But they just tested everything in the capsule in Earth orbit. They Artemis 2 did everything Apollo 7 did, like testing out the ship and everything. And the Apollo 7 took multiple days to do. They did it in one orbit of the Earth. So Apollo 8 orbited the moon. That was okay. We gotta get here for the Russians. That's part of why they kind of did that big leap there. Here's the interesting thing. So what Artemis 3 is going to be doing is going to be very similar to what Apollo 9 was. They're going to be back in Earth orbit, and they're going to be bringing up the lander, and they're going to be testing docking, undocking, crew transfer, all that stuff in Earth orbit. The difference is we're not doing an Apollo 10 where we go test the lander of crew really close to the moon and all that. We're going straight from testing in all Earth orbit to landing on the moon in Artemis 4.
Yes. And I believe three, we haven't gotten any final mission parameters for three, but there is talk of testing two separate landers on that mission because they have yet to decide if they will be using SpaceX's lander or if they will be using Blue Origin's lander,
Yeah,
which is
the
also a deviation from the Apollo missions where NASA built the lander. It wasn't a commercial lander for the missions. Well, for these missions, we're using commercially built landers for these missions. So it'll be interesting to see which one is chosen for the mission. But looking at both SpaceX and Blue Origin before um, Artemis 3 and before Artemis 4, so between now and Artemis 4 launch, both companies are doing multiple launches and tests of their landers, where they will be going to the moon unmanned and testing the landers' landing capabilities on the moon. So it's not as if on Artemis 4 they're going to be going to the moon with a lander that's never been tested in its ability to land on the moon. It'll just be the first time there'll be people on it.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing too, is that back in the Apollo days, and even before, every spacecraft was not made by NASA itself. It was still made by companies. So, um, I can't remember who made the Apollo capsule, but Grumman, who's now Northrop Grumman, I think they might have changed names again, but they made the lunar lander originally. But it was all part of NASA design, NASA specs, um, and like tested everything by NASA. These companies, they have to test everything on their own and deliver it as a working product to NASA, and that's why it's considered commercial.
Yeah, so NASA took no part in the design, any of the specs, anything like that. And these companies want to continue to be able to work closely with NASA. So they know they have to deliver a good working product that does not kill the astronauts. That would
Yeah,
be very bad for their companies if the lander failed through a design flaw or something like that.
and that's the thing too. Like because these are commercial products being delivered to NASA, they don't have to be used solely by NASA. They could be if SpaceX wants to use their lander and go land their own astronauts on the moon outside of NASA, they could do that. If Blue Origin wants to go land people up there on their own, and they don't have to, you don't have to use Orion to dock with the landers to get to the moon. You could Blue Origin can make their own crew capsule. SpaceX could modify Dragon to go to the moon. They don't. They could use their own capsules as well as and send things if they wanted to. This is just NASA's program. NASA did design Orion, which was still built by Boeing, but it no Lockheed built Orion. Boeing built
Yeah,
Starliner. Their capsule was built by Lockheed, but it is their specs, their design. They're the ones launching it.
yeah, yeah. So they just contracted Lockheed to actually make the product. NASA doesn't actually make too many of their own things. They design it, and then typically other companies build the things.
Correct. They do some like assembly and everything. Like NASA does the assembly of all their ships in the vehicle assembly line, which is owned by NASA. Um, Artemis, the Orion capsules, they're mostly assembled off-site. They are finished on NASA facilities at Kennedy, I believe. Like I
Yes.
think there
Yeah.
is like they do final touches and everything. Years ago, I got to actually go out to the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, and see them assembling the SLS. I got a really good opportunity to go see that. Um, and it's crazy because yeah, it's all these different parts built by all these different companies. They still use NASA specs, and they say, okay, these all have to fit together perfectly because this is going to be going to space. The only specs you really have with uh, sorry, I'm getting distracted. I'm looking over the stream thing, and the stream might be very behind, but um, we'll see what happens. Anyways, the only thing that lost my train of thought. Uh, NASA really sends to these crews to say, here's what you have to use, is probably the docking port. Because they say, okay, here is how we have to connect to our thing. You have to build it to the spec. And that's probably the only thing they really say. There's probably other things they say, okay, we want to be able to do this, this, and this. We'll buy a lander that has these features. But really, SpaceX and Blue Origin are doing two very different approaches. Like, they're both doing very tall landers. I don't know if you've seen the mock ups of them, but
Yeah.
uh, Starship's human landing system is they have to have an elevator to go down. That's going to be kind of crazy to see. It's not going to be a ladder. I think the Blue Origin one's going to have a ladder, but
Hmm.
imagine being so tall you have to take an elevator up there.
Yeah, that's which, you know, playing Kerbal Space Program and everything. I've learned that tall, skinny landers, um, are a pain in the butt. Um,
They
you
are.
have you have to find really flat ground, um, and be very careful because that higher center of gravity, man, it's just so easy to tip the thing over. And if you tip it over, it's very hard to get it upright again. And something that I can do in Kerbal that we probably can't do in real life, is, if the lander falls over, I just get everybody back inside, and then I find a nice big hill and I use it as a ramp, and I fire my rocket engine, and I just make sure I don't go too fast to where it blows up. I don't really think that that is an option in the real world. Um, so we got to make sure that the lander doesn't fall over.
Yeah, they're going to have some really good legs on that. And also, being so tall with elevators, one thing I've always questioned, which they're going to test this like in 20,000 different ways, but what happens if the motor breaks on that your thing to get the elevator up and down? What is the backup to get the crew back into that ship?
That is a great question.
It, are they going to have hand cranks on there? Is it going to be.
Well, I would imagine that just like regular elevator shafts here on Earth, there's probably a hatch at the top of the, what do you call it, the elevator box that they ride in. They probably have to open a hatch, and then hopefully there's ladders or some kind of system that they could just climb back up.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
know because SpaceX has been. I think SpaceX has been pretty quiet on how it's fully going to be designed. Blue Origin, for all their secrecy of a lot of other stuff, they were pretty open with their design of how their lander is going to work. And actually, later this year, they are launching a prototype of their lander. It's going to be unmanned. It's going to be just a smaller version that's going to be testing fundamentals, but they're going to be landing it on the moon, and they're going to be testing just some of the basic concepts that they want to put in their big lander.
yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that launch, and watching some of it, and seeing how it performs on the moon. It won't be the first time since Apollo that we've landed stuff on the moon. We have done tons of stuff on the moon since Apollo. We just haven't sent people back. So
That
that's
is
one of the
true.
things when people say something like, "Oh, well, if we were able to do it back in the '60s and '70s, why have we never gone back?" It's like, well, we've gone back probably 100 times. We just haven't sent people because, well, we haven't needed to.
Yep, we've
Um,
gone back multiple times with mixed success. There's been a lot of landers recently that some have failed, some haven't. A lot have landed on their side because they were tall landers. So good luck to the commercial program for landing on the moon because tall landers don't seem to be having the best luck so far.
Yeah. I hope it doesn't create too much problem where they have to go back to the design board, and scrap the tall design. Um, the landers themselves, they look really cool. The mock-ups that I've seen of them, they look extremely futuristic, if you will. Um, and it's something really cool. I'd love to see the photos that the astronauts take of the landers sitting on the lunar surface. Um, with that whole futuristic. I mean, they look like your quintessential sci-fi spaceships. They don't look like the lunar landers from the Apollo program. They're very sleek. They don't have, stuff on the outside. Like you could see a lot of the pieces of the lunar lander from the Apollo missions. Like it wasn't all encased in a nice, pretty frame and things like that. Like tanks were just, visible from the outside, and it had that gold foil and everything covering things. Um, Whereas these landers, everything is in a nice, casing, if you will. Um,
But that's the thing, you don't need that in space. There's no atmosphere on the moon. You can have everything be bare. A spacecraft doesn't need all these nice casings. The only reasons why a lot of ours have it now is because they're flying in through the atmosphere. I mean, look at the International Space Station. It does not need to be as fancy as it like it doesn't need to have all these smooth everything. It's that thing's got stuff jutting out all over it because it can.
yeah, absolutely. It's not needed, but it looks cool.
It does look cool, and if there's one thing that the commercial companies like to do is they like to make craft that look cool.
Yeah, I mean these commercial companies are also having to deal with branding and things like that, and I'm sure that they want to be able to sell these landers um, to other companies, potentially other space agencies, to use the landers, and I'm sure they're trying to design something that is multi-purpose, that could you know potentially survive reentry even. Um, so
I don't know about the reentry part because the uh, starship that is going to be landing on the moon will not have heat shield tiles on it. It will not have the wings on it that you see on normal starships because it doesn't need it. They plan to leave that thing either in lunar orbit. Well, actually, I don't know what the plan is. Originally, the plan was to leave it orbiting dock to Gateway, but Gateway is gone now.
yeah,
So I don't know what the plan is for Artemis 4 because originally Gateway was planned to be there before Artemis 4.
yeah. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. I'm sure they'll figure that out. We have, what is it, six lunar lander remnants that are currently. Oh no, they've probably fallen out of orbit by now.
You
But
mean
we
the
left six
upper
landers.
stages?
We left six upper stages of the landers in orbit around the moon during the Apollo missions.
Um, no, we didn't actually. They were all programmed, I believe, to crash back into the surface after um, they jettisoned from the command module. The only exception to that was Apollo 9 and Apollo 13, which both re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. But um, these all crashed into the moon, I believe, to test seismic
Mm,
sensors they
okay.
put down. But also, even if they weren't, they would not be there anymore. Unlike Earth, the moon does not have a stable gravity well around the whole thing like the Earth does. It gravity is a lot more inconsistent around the moon. I guess I don't know if it's the way the mass is distributed among the crust of the moon and everything, but lunar orbits are not necessarily stable unless you get with a certain orbit or you have enough fuel to constantly be adjusting it.
Yeah, it's closer. Low lunar orbits are unstable. Really high lunar orbits. I'm not sure what the distance there is, but really high lunar orbits are more stable because those fluctuations in the um, gravity field, for lack of a better term, um, are affect the spacecraft less. It's not that they don't affect it at all. It's just that it, you know, becomes negligible at the distance that they're at. Whereas something in low lunar orbit might fall out of orbit and hit the moon after a few months or a couple of years. The higher up you go, while your orbit will still be unstable, you won't be at such a high risk of hitting the moon.
Yeah, I'm reading an interesting thing here. In the first manned lunar landing mission, Apollo 11, they tried to correct for the inconsistencies of the orbit by their parking orbit that they had the capsule in was circularized at 66 by 54 nautical miles, which was expected to become a nominal circular 60 miles by the time the module made its way back up to return. However, they overestimated the inconsistencies, and actually the orbit only changed by about 2 miles in each direction, not the six that they were planning on.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah, so there are ways to there are stable orbits. We have multiple lunar orbiters that have been up there for years that are in a stable orbit. I think they're stable polar orbits, but there are several orbital inclinations that they can stay in low orbit pretty well.
Yeah, yeah, it gets pretty cool. And staying in the same vein of kind of some future missions and things that are going on. Um, and speaking of polar orbits, what's really cool is that these um, Artemis missions that are going to be landing on the moon, starting with Artemis 4, are going to be landing on the poles of the moon.
Is that still
Um,
confirmed?
I believe so, yeah.
I didn't know if all
Last
the changes with Gateway not being there anymore, if they were still going for the poles, or if they were just trying to establish a safer and or an easier land on like the equator and then work your way to the poles. At least I don't know the answer to this, but that's what I assume they would do because they want to test everything, make sure it works, and then go for the riskier missions once they really know. But maybe all that'll be sorted out with the unmanned test, and they will be going for the polar. I just haven't seen anything saying with all the changes going on, if Artemis 4 is still going to be a polar landing or not.
I haven't seen anything saying it's not, but you know, maybe they won't be. Um, but what's crazy about that is that landing on the poles is much harder than landing around the equator of the moon. Um, it's really easy to get from Earth to the moon and be in an equatorial orbit around the moon because we pretty much have an equatorial orbit around the Earth. And so when we slingshot to the moon, we're already on that same kind of plane. So, it's pretty easy to pick that up. So once they get there, um, they have to change their orbit to be a polar orbit, or they have to launch differently from Earth so that they're in a polar orbit around the Earth to end up in a polar orbit when they get to the moon. There's multiple ways that they could achieve a polar orbit around the moon, but all of it ends up being way more expensive in terms of fuel usage than just achieving equatorial orbits. So it'll be an interesting thing to see of how they decide to achieve that polar landing. It'll be really exciting. We have not been to the poles of the moon before with people. Um, I think we've sent some probes, um,
Yeah,
some
the
unmanned craft to the poles.
I believe we might have sent them to the poles. We definitely have a lot of orbiters that are in polar orbits because they've I think the lunar reconnaissance orbiter is the main one, but they have mapped the entire lunar surface with the technology at the time of that. So we've got a couple others that have been searching for water and stuff. So I couldn't tell you for sure. I don't believe China sent any to the poles. I know they've sent some to the far side of the moon, but I don't believe there are any that went to the poles.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up. That's a little more time than we've got. So um, just one thing that I've been asked a lot by people that don't really follow space stuff as closely as you and I do, is why are we going back to the moon? Why does it matter? People were asking me this on Wednesday when I was watching, and they're like, "What are you so excited about? We've been to the moon already. Like, who cares? So why should people care about this? And what's the point of these missions? Why does it matter that we're going to the poles? Why does it matter if there's water on the moon? Um, you know,
Well,
those kinds of questions.
I look at it personally as a couple things. One, it's inspirational, and we as a species need something we like to explore for one. We're a species that likes to explore um, the Earth and clearly beyond because we've sent so many probes out everywhere. But it's inspirational, and in a time of a lot of turmoil here on Earth, we need something inspirational to for us. The Apollo landings happened during Vietnam, and that kind of was like a bright spot of while a lot of stuff was going down. Um, in a more practical side, one thing the moon has because that's just more abundant from the asteroids and everything that hit it is a couple rare materials that we can't really find on Earth. One of them being a isotope of helium, which is called helium-3, which and a couple other materials like that. But that is a material that is suspected to be prime for fusion. So if we could get that from the moon, we can hopefully figure out fusion better. Or once we figure it out, we have a fuel source right up there.
Yeah, that'd be something that'd be really cool. We could talk about fusion in a subsequent podcast because
Yeah.
what's going on with fusion's super cool. Um, but the reason why it would be really cool to find water on the moon is because I don't know if a lot of you know this. I know Travis knows this, but on the SLS, that giant orange centerpiece that the two big white boosters are mounted to on the outside that launches that rocket, the
Yep, you
rocket
see it
fuel.
right behind me there.
Yeah, the rocket fuel in that center orange piece there is hydrogen and oxygen. And when that combusts into the flame that you see coming out of the bottom of the rocket there, the exhaust of that is water. So if we could find water on the moon, we could rip apart the water molecule into its hydrogen and oxygen atoms and then store that and use that as fuel.
And actually,
Uh,
Blue Origin's lander specifically is the first lander that I know of that is using liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen as its fuel sources to land. We used to use uh, not cryogenic, hypergolic fuels, which are fuels that combust when they um, react. And these were really good fuels for what we use them for, but you have a lot more efficiency with a hydrogen and oxygen engine. It's one of the most efficient engines out there.
yeah, yeah, one of the most efficient non-theoretical engines.
Yeah, Blue Origin and SpaceX also have pretty efficient engines now with their BE3, BE4, um, and Raptor engines, which are all methane based, which that's what SpaceX is going to be using to land on the moon. I don't. Can they get methane from the moon?
I'm not. Excuse me. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think that there's anything that produces methane or anything that's like in asteroids um, that would put methane on the moon, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. There might be methane deposits on the moon that they could access.
There are, but it seems to be very source and rare, like or not very trace amounts. It's very rare.
Mm. Okay.
So methane, I guess you could. Methane is usually made by more like organic stuff, but well, actually, they could probably have factories to make methane because methane is just a single carbon atom and four hydrogen atoms. So if they're already pulling the water out, you could probably get carbon on the moon easily because carbon's in almost everything. If you can extract that, you could probably make methane. It's gonna be a little more work than just making a hydrolox engine, but you could
Yeah.
do it.
So that's kind of, a couple reasons why these missions are important. And why would we care about making rocket fuel on the moon? What's the purpose of that? Well,
We can go
ultimately,
further.
ultimately, the intention of the Artemis missions is to build and maintain a permanent presence on the moon and use the moon as a stepping stone to the rest of our solar system. A stepping stone firstly, to get human beings to Mars. It would be so much cheaper and so much easier to launch humans on a mission to Mars from the moon rather than trying to do the same thing and launching them from Earth. If we had to launch a rocket from Earth that was going to have a um, spacecraft that could carry our astronauts to Mars and then have a lander that could land them on Mars and then return them to the spacecraft and then come home, the size of that rocket would have to be ridiculous. It would be a the most massive rocket ever built because of just all the things needed for the spacecraft to safely carry human beings all the way to Mars. It would be much cheaper to just launch some people to the moon, get them to the moon, put them on the spacecraft on the moon, and then launch the spacecraft to Mars from there. It would be use way less fuel overall, and the rocket launched from the moon would be able to be a lot smaller. And getting away from the moon's gravity well takes way less fuel. Um, so it's super exciting, super important that, these missions are successful and they find the things that they're hoping to find so that we can use the moon as a stepping stone to take us farther out into the stars and go places that we haven't gone.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it's less fuel to get off the moon. Even if you get off the moon, you're still in the Earth's gravity well. You're just in a larger portion of it, but you could even use the Earth's gravity to slingshot you towards Mars, and it really will not cost much. It's
Hmm.
obviously it's an investment to make everything on Earth to get it up there, but once we start being able to manufacture things up on the moon and everything, it's going to be so much cheaper after the initial beginning. That got away from me,
Yeah.
but
But yeah, no, it's definitely exciting stuff. You know, and then also manufacturing things on the moon. There's no atmosphere on the moon. There's no life on the moon. So manufacturing a lot of these things for these spacecraft and things like that, as cool as they are, I mean, it does produce a considerable amount of pollution. And to be able to move that to a place that we don't have to worry about destroying, um, is not a bad thing in my opinion. Um, you know, if we can manufacture the steel and all the other metals that need to go into building a spacecraft right on the moon, we don't have to put the pollutants for those materials into our own atmosphere and deal with that. And so that makes it more economical and more ecologically friendly um, to do these missions.
yeah, I don't know how. I don't know if you can make steel on the moon. I don't know if we have. I mean, you would need iron and whatever else we throw into it now.
You trying to tell me there's not iron on the moon, Trav?
Now, there's gotta be iron, but was okay. What goes into making steel? I feel like I should
Iron
know
and
this.
carbon,
Is it just iron and carbon?
essentially.
Okay. Yeah, we can make we should be able to make it then.
Now, aluminum and gold and some of the other metals, now, I'm not entirely sure if those are all able to be found on the moon and, where on the moon that they are found, you know. Because, like you were saying, a lot of the materials that we're going to be getting from the moon are from asteroid impacts on the moon. So there could be deposits of all these different kinds of rare earth metals all over the place on the moon, but they might not be close to each other. Um, so, maybe one day, years from now, we'll have a bunch of different mining facilities on the moon gathering these materials and taking them to a more centralized production facility on the moon. And we could have a huge set of industry on the moon. Maybe there'll be roads on the moon. You could be a moon trucker. That'd be pretty cool. Who knows what's going to happen? Uh,
So, funny
but
story on that too. The first electric car in space was not the Roadster. It was the lunar rover because that was an electric car built by GM.
oh, wow. So they can do it, they just choose not to.
Yeah, well, I think GM manufactured it because it was. I was watching some episode of Moon Machines. Um, I think it's on. Currently, it's on Apple TV. So, um, they have a whole episode on the lunar rover, and I think it was GM that got the contract to build it because there were a bunch of different companies that had a bunch of different ideas, and GM was like, "Hey, we have an idea of a lunar lander that'll fold up. It'll fit in the one little corner of your spacecraft, and it doesn't weigh hardly anything."
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a bunch of cool stuff. It's what has me so amped about these missions, why they're so cool. Aside from the fact that, I mean, we just haven't sent people back there in 53 and a half years. Um, it's just really cool to be returning to the moon with a human presence. Um, right now, the astronauts today, at this very point in time, are farther away from Earth than any human beings have been since 1972 in Apollo 17. Um, so like it's just really crazy to think about, that we've got people that are some how far away are they right now?
And not just that, in their first orbit around the Earth, because they did a highly elliptical orbit, they did the farthest orbit that any astronaut has ever done, as
Yeah,
well.
they did. I believe that at that point in time they were about 24,000 miles above the surface. I think they were farther than any human has gone since 1972 at that point in time.
They were
Um,
the farthest since then was the Hubble missions, because Hubble flew, I believe, 300 something miles up, but they were also it was boosted even higher. But Hubble is the highest mission we've done before that, I think.
yeah. So currently, I just looked it up. Currently, they are 145,000 miles away from Earth and about the same distance from the moon. Um, so now, as they get closer to the moon, they are slowing down. So it's going to be from when they did their translunar injection burn. It was a 4-day timer before they reached the moon. They'll be near the moon for about 6 hours, and then they'll have a 4-day journey back to the Earth. But the closer they get to the moon, the slower their total speed is. Like Trav was saying earlier, the higher you get in your orbit, the slower you're going, because gravity is trying to pull you back down.
Okay,
Um,
so I looked it up. It was actually more recently the record was broken for the highest orbit. So in 2024, SpaceX's Polaris Dawn mission reached an apogee of 870 miles, which broke the record from 1966 of 853 miles by Gemini 11.
okay, cool. Well, so for, about 2 years, they had the record for farthest humans away from Earth. And then our Artemis II crew, the crew of integrity, absolutely gollywomped that record with 24,000 miles.
Yeah, they could see the entire Earth in one thing. It wasn't like, okay, we see more of the Earth because astronauts they can't see the whole globe from space now. They can only see like a tiny portion of it
Hmm.
because they are so close. When when we went up there in Artemis 2 here in this their first orbit, they could see the entire globe. They were that far away.
Yeah, which is really cool. I can't wait to get some Earthrise photos, when they get closer to the moon and they get to see, um, because at a certain point in this too, I'm not sure if we'll be losing communications with them because of this, but at a certain point, in their orbit around the moon will be between them and the Earth, and they will no longer be able to see the Earth. Um, so as they come around that other side of the moon, they will experience what is, called Earthrise, where they get to see the Earth come over the horizon of the moon. Um,
Now
and
they're going to
that's
be
just,
much further away from the moon than they were on Apollo, so I'm not sure how much of the moon they're going to be able to see at once because they're going to be like 2,000 miles up, which Apollo was like maybe 100 something miles.
yeah, yeah, they're going to be 2,000 some odd miles up. And they're only going to be able to see about 20% of the far side of the moon while they're up there, due to the way that the moon is oriented with the light and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
but they're going to be laying human eyes on things that have never before been seen by human eyes, um,
So that's the other
which
thing
is
too, which is why I think they're not doing a polar landing. They might still be, but I thought part of the reason they were going to be doing this was they're like starting to scope out landing locations and stuff on the moon. But they're not in a polar orbit now, so
correct. I'm not entirely sure on the polar landings.
hmm
Um, I haven't heard anything that says that we won't be. Um, but
NASA
you
might still
know,
be trying to figure out what they want to do. They might change their mind.
yeah, they do all the time.
Yes, they
So
do. Especially administration to administration or day to day based on, hey, we found this, or hey, this person's running behind, so this mission's going to be changing this way. We don't know what they're going to do.
yeah, super interesting stuff though. Do you have anything else to say about Artemis 2? And what's going on with integrity and the crew?
Nothing comes to mind right now. There's a lot of exciting stuff. If anyone wants to, if you're watching this while the mission's going on, there is a live stream that they have on YouTube or on NASA TV where they constantly have just stuff going on about that mission. If you are, uh, if you're watching after I don't know what to say if you're watching after the mission's over, but right now it's going to be okay. They're definitely on their way back to Earth. They are going to slingshot around the moon. They're going to pretty much pull an Apollo 13 where they loop around the moon. And they just come back. They're doing a figure eight, and they are actually yeah. Apollo 13 is a good example of what this mission is in terms of flight profile.
Yeah, it's almost identical.
They're not going to be
In
as
the
close to the
look
moon, but
of the profile. Yeah, they're not
yeah,
going anywhere near as close, but both missions ran a free return trajectory from the moon, which I believe it was a safety feature of the Apollo missions. Again, I might be wrong here. I'm speculating wildly. I have not looked this
it
up to confirm it,
it was
but
actually they were on free return trajectory. So that way, if they lost, if they had any issues on the way, they could just loop back around. However, the Apollo 13 did have, they had just gotten out of their free return trajectory. They made a trajectory modification to get out of that to reach where they were supposed to be landing. But they're not doing any of those modifications here. They're staying free return trajectory. They're doing the minor course corrections we talked about earlier, but besides that, they're going to be just looping around, doing a figure eight, and then coming back. So really, there is nothing major that could. I'm not gonna say nothing can go wrong because spaceflight stuff can always go wrong, but there's nothing where if they lost an engine now or anything would really stop this. Gonna stop them from coming back to Earth and being able to return safely.
yeah, the next scheduled time that they will actually be using their engine will be after they have already looped around the moon, and they will be fine tuning their return trajectory to Earth. Even if their engines fail and they're unable to do that, they will still be hitting Earth's atmosphere, just not necessarily where they want to. So, regardless of anything that happens, they're going to be able to get home.
So that
Um,
is one last thing I want to bring up: the heat shield, because
oof.
that was a problem on Artemis One. The spacecraft made it back safely, but there was that more burning and pitting in this heat shield than they were expecting. So they are flying this mission with the same heat shield, but they're doing a modified entry profile than they did on Artemis One, which will allow it to, which actually might also be why they're flying at the angles and everything they are now. Maybe the altitude and everything from the moon might have something to do with okay, we want to fly higher so that way we come back at a different speed or something.
Potentially.
Because as you get lower in the slingshot maneuver, you pick up more speed. So they might be picking up less speed by doing it this way as well. I don't know that for certain. That's just a guess, but they
I don't know that it would affect their speed on return too much in the direction of slower. um, because when they return, they will be traveling around a whopping 7 miles per second upon reentry. Um, so I don't really know how much more they could slow them down, but basically, they're coming around the moon and then just about falling straight back into the atmosphere from the moon, picking up speed that entire time. Um,
But NASA is confident in the heat shield and the new profile they have that it will keep the crew safe. I mean, Artemis 1 made it back safe. If there were people on that craft, they would have come back safe. That was not going to be an issue.
yeah,
So NASA is confident that the crew is going to come back safe, but that is one thing we're going to be looking out for as the mission progresses is what's going to happen and what are they going to find on there. They're going with a different heat shield for Artemis 3. So we don't have to worry about any necessary learning lessons as much with this one because they've already have a new design they're working on for that mission.
yeah, which will be used on all the subsequent Artemis missions.
Yeah, because what
From
they did
there.
is they were trying to do a different procedure which would have saved some costs, saved some labor, but they found okay, this one didn't work as well. We're going back to the other method, which costs a little more, takes a little more labor, but we know it's a more sound method. We tried this one, we found hey, it didn't work as well. It worked, just not as well. So we're going back to a more Apollo style one, is what I believe I heard.
Yeah, they are. They are um, more tried and true, safer, um, less possibility for these failures that happen in this heat shield. Now, anybody that's getting worried about us talking about the damage to this heat shield, none of the damage extended all the way through the heat shield.
No, it was
Uh,
just segments where parts were more burned through than they were initially expecting.
yeah. So it still did its job in the entirety. The astronauts will still be safe. It's just that the heat shield might take on a little more damage than they were expecting it to. But in no way did the heat shield fail. And this altered profile that they'll be using, the heat shield will need to do its job for less time. So, you know, there's less chance for anything to go wrong than from the Artemis 1 mission. So I'm fully confident that these astronauts will be landing in what is it's the Pacific, right?
It is the Pacific, yes.
Yeah.
And actually, there is a learning lesson because if this altered profile does do less burning like they're expecting, they might look back and say, "Hey, we can modify the heat shield that we're changing again and make it more like this one because we found a profile that works better."
Yeah. So it's interesting stuff. We're 2 days out from the moon now.
We are 2 days out, and it just get an interesting fact I want to throw out there. They're going to be not orbiting the moon, going around the moon on Easter,
Yep.
which is just interesting because Apollo 8 went around on Christmas. So if you're into that sort of thing, it's just a neat coincidence. It wasn't planned. It's just how everything lined up.
Yeah. So these four phenomenal human beings will be spending Easter next to the moon, and in my opinion, that's an extremely cool experience. Um,
I wonder if they hit any like Easter eggs or anything on the Orion. Be like NASA calls up. All right, we hit some Easter eggs on there. If you guys want to go look for them.
we're having a lunar Easter egg hunt.
Oh, that actually would have been such a cool idea if they had been like, "Hey, we're gonna hide Easter eggs on board, so the astronauts have to find them while the kids on Earth are looking for Easter eggs."
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. That'd be a
Or
good PR stunt.
or if like they go for like a live stream and everyone's wearing like bunny ears or something. We don't know what they'll have planned, but hopefully they thought of something. They might not have, might have been like a last minute thing, but they knew if they launched on the first, they knew they were gonna land on this day. So maybe they have something planned. But really cool stuff. We can keep talking forever on this, but we don't want to. We're gonna stay here forever if we keep talking.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're at a good place to wrap up for today. Um, we'll be back probably before this mission is over, but that will not be our normal schedule
We
for
don't know our normal
podcast.
schedule yet. We'll have to figure that out.
We will, but as Artemis 2 progresses in its mission, we'll probably have another one where we talk about things that have gone on, probably closer to the astronauts returning um, to Earth after they've, been to the moon. Uh, last thing I have to say uh, for today is just simply Godspeed to the Integrity crew, and I hope everything goes according to plan.
Yep, Godspeed, and we look forward to following your progress. And to everyone watching, we'll see you hopefully soon.